All right, and we are live for this week's HangOps. And as is traditional with me running HangOps, I'm totally unprepared with a topic, so instead would love to just talk about things. So whatever happens to be on your mind. We were just before I hit the mash the go live button. We were talking a little bit about org charts, which is everybody's fun adventure. But yeah, anybody have anything they want to talk about specifically? Or we could talk about org charts more, because that's awesome.
I mean, related to that could be in the Slack room today that we're talking about the idea of an IC that was just like a distinguished engineer type of thing, like how that works. Some companies treat like the highest role you can get to before your management, basically.
Well, and so it's interesting at Chef is that it's not the highest level you can get to before you get management, because it's actually on par with a management person. So like I am an engineering lead, but there are like senior engineers that actually fall above me on it. Like if you were to look at things from like a pay grade standpoint and like where they stand as far as the engineering organization sits, they're not in. How do I put this without like sounding crazy? They're not actually like from a chain of command perspective. They're not in direct chain of command, but they are absolutely they're senior engineers. And essentially there's a non-engineering or there is an engineering path that doesn't take you up management. So you don't have to like, oh, I'm a software engineer 3. My next step is I must go to manager. You may, instead of going the management path, you may go the direction of, it isn't distinguished. What's the term we use for it?
So we have, in my engineering org, we have principal engineers.
There we go.
And the key there is that they're not attached to a functional team. So they report to the GM of the division rather than to an engineering lead. And they move around between functional teams as best suits like the current roadmap and what those functional teams are doing.
So like, because most of you have like experience dealing with Chef, John Kaiser is a great example of a principal engineer where like he just does crazy things and they're awesome. So he's helping different functional parts of the org instead of focusing on one specific thing at a time, if that makes sense. Or managing people for that matter.
Interesting. Yeah, I've worked in a couple of places where, like, especially in startups, the titles just don't matter. Like, director of integration just kind of meant that he did more integration than everybody else, but he had, like, the director level, even though he was the only person doing it. So.
Well, and it's... Go ahead, Brian.
Well, so we were like that at Chef for a long time, but we fixed that partially for, like, mostly, I think, for cultural reasons of like we want to as the company's growing rapidly, we want to be able to hire people, and like when you hire 2 people for doing similar work, if they have like completely different titles and completely different pay scales, like it's easy for people to feel jilted, right? So we went through like a big effort of like trying to get all those things in line. And really, I think the titles, like the only time we really use them is for making sure that people are being paid adequately or appropriately for what the work they do is.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. So even when you get into really large organizations, so I worked for the University of California for a long time, and there's a payroll title. So forever so I started as a programmer analyst 2. I moved to a programmer analyst 3 and never made it to a programmer analyst 4. But what those titles were tied to was more or less pay and some really, really general thoughts around what level you were as an engineer. And then your actual title, like your working title, was kept in the system as well, and that actually described what you did. So, like, for example, I think I was an infrastructure engineer at one point, so like I was on the team responsible for, as you can guess, infrastructure. I was a systems, I think systems admin, systems engineer, or HPC engineer, something like that. And that meant that I worked in HPC, and it was an arbitrary thing. Like I could totally change it to whatever. Well, I couldn't. My manager could totally change it to whatever he thought was appropriate, within reason, because like there were 5 people in like the HR department that had to like approve it. But as long as it wasn't like crazy, you could totally do that. What I don't like is people that their title is like ninja. Like that's not super useful, and it's not that I don't like the person. I don't know that I'd ever want to work for an organization that had it that way, because like, what does that even mean?
Would you want to work for an org that had one of their C-level executives as Master Chief? Well,
Only if they were responsible for Halo.
organizing the Halo meetups.
And arguably, I would almost be. Okay, this is going to be me being philosophical, but like if your C-level executive is being referred to as Master Chief, you actually don't understand what a Master Chief is, and you need to go back and like learn you some rank, because a Master Chief is actually that they can't be a C-level executive, because a C-level executive in Master Chief would be like an admiral. Okay, thanks.
These are all valid points.
It's interesting. Has anyone worked at like Microsoft or a place where they've had like similar to what you're talking about, Chris, with like having pay scales that like pay scale job titles? The conversations like used to worked at Microsoft for a long time. Stuff. What the pay scales that they have there sound a lot like the stuff I've heard from the military, where you have like these different levels, a lot like you were talking about.
That makes sense, and probably corresponds well to like the GS grades, like you're a GS whatever, or and that's one that I've never understood. Like I at least the ranks make sense to me. Like I can actually like, and it's really interesting within the military. You actually start to understand based on someone's rank what their responsibilities are organizationally. So, for example, if someone is an NCO, you know that they have people reporting to them, like that they have people that they're responsible for. You know that if someone's a flag officer, and for those that don't know what a flag officer is, their car gets a flag because they have stars on it. Which means, so your generals and your admirals. It means that they're responsible for large organizations in the vast majority of cases. So yeah, it would be interesting to see how well that mapped. Like, could you just go take like a GS pay grade and assume that because someone is this GS pay grade, they have this role in the organization?
I'd say Yahoo was large enough for that. They had technical 1 through 3, and then independent contributor farther up the chain. I think it also determined pay grade to a certain degree.
That makes sense.
Yahoo, I'm not sure how much you want to copy. I also have a little bit of sympathy for companies that have residual, ninja titles. I mean, that was a big thing in the first dot boom, and it was a direct rejection of the 5 or 6 tiers of management that a lot of people were afraid of running into or afraid of taking over their startups in 99 and 2000. So we saw a lot of that. Honestly, I think it's just a cultural holdover. Yeah, it's probably time to get past that. But I don't quite have the knee-jerk, you're a bunch of ridiculous man-children response to seeing someone with the title. I just think, oh, they either were in the first dot boom and never got past the goofy title thing, or they're trying to make a point that they are not particularly welcoming of having a VP of finance marketing and a VP of operations engineering and a VP of office supplies. It's a little reflexive, but it's trying to define something by a negative more than have an action figure title. by itself.
Well, that makes sense, and you hit that real important point, right? Of, oh, and then she went away. But I think that that's an important point, though. Just like we're all humans, and like we all have these gut reactions to things, and it's like maybe that wasn't the right thing. And really, it's I think important to what's the word I'm looking for here? Like have empathy and understand. Like, oh, yes, that seems horrible to me, but there's probably more reason to things than I actually see. So give people the benefit of the doubt. I had a random thought and it disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, because part of that, right, is that you lock people into their initial reaction if you respond with like if you react to it, right? I think that's super common. Is like someone gets upset and you're like, no, you're wrong, and then now they defend their position. Whereas if you respond to that and you're like, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you explain it to me another way? Then it's a lot easier for people to be like, oh, I was being crazy. I'm sorry.
Well, and what's interesting, so that was my crazy thought I had earlier, was that we act like this is just a thing of like tech startups, but like in sales organizations, you frequently have these really crazy titles because in order for people to like as part of the sales discussion have discussions like, yes, this person doesn't have anyone reporting to them, but they are a VP of Western sales, because well, if you just said account person, they wouldn't get the meeting. But if they're the VP of Western sales, regardless of the fact that Western sales means everything west of the Mississippi, like those are definitely. It's been going on for longer than I've been alive is probably the best way to put that.
Oh, I've definitely used title manipulation when I needed to for hardware negotiations, or even just changing my title when I had to speak to ISPs. There's no shame in that.
Well, that's interesting. It's like, so I'm a system administrator who came from internet service provider backgrounds, or was a system administrator, right? I'm an engineering lead at Chef now. Right, like that was always weird when you work in those organizations and small IT shops, right? When you're like the one sysadmin for an entire company, and you end up, that's where like the ninja thing comes in, because I'm like, well, I'm the HVAC engineer. I'm also like, the guy that runs the servers, the guy that stacks the servers. I'm the guy that fixes QuickBooks for accounting, and all these things, and you see a lot of people coming out of that have on resumes titles like director of IT, where IT was like a them, and that gets really interesting, because then you're like, well, a director has to those titles are supposed to mean something, right? Like director means that there were people under you, or doesn't, right? I know at Chef we've had some directors that were like special projects sort of stuff that didn't have any people work for them. I've never really quite gotten which words mean which things myself.
It's definitely an interesting thing, right? Like, and frequently, like there's that mishmash, right? Like we really don't have titles that don't assume management roles in general, because you frequently have people that are very high up in the organization, and that person's job is just to go kick ass. Like in fact, you frequently in like nonprofit organizations have the vice president of ways and means, which is basically code for this person gets shit done and isn't part of the politicking process. They're just going to roll and like get this person over here and get this person over here, and they're going to do the thing and go do the thing, because that's what they do. They're the vice president of ways and means, but they don't have like hierarchy. They don't have someone that's like, I'm in charge here. They're just the person that gets stuff done.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of so. Job before where I was a build and release engineer, and then I happened to get a LinkedIn request from the guy that had my job previously. And when I was looking at his jobs, I was like, oh, okay, so here's what he put for the same organization, same level, but his title was that he gave himself was Director of DevOps Infrastructure or something like that. And I thought, well, I've been selling myself short this whole time. I could be directing the DevOps in higher capacities than I'm obviously doing. So, but I've also worked in like larger places where it did feel very like military like. So you had like associate, and that assumed this bracket. Then you had above that maybe like staff level, and then senior, and then you move on to kind of more of the distinguished levels. Like if you take Big Blue, for instance, they have, you get enough patents, and then you move on to like senior czar of research type of things. Like it's an interesting mix.
So does that mean you're changing your title next week to Senior Director of the DevOps?
I don't work there anymore. Now I'm back to an organization where I'm at staff software engineer level.
You can at least take claim for some thought leadership or something there, right?
I mean, that's definitely a skill that I could probably get voted up on there.
That reminds me.
Certificate.
Right. Okay, how do you add new things to LinkedIn? Because I want to go like endorse people for random things, but like there's no way to like, and not even so much random things. Like there's a couple things that would be neat, like our new technologies that we're seeing. It would be cool to be like, I'm going to endorse you for this, even if it's like a NoSQL database or something. But anyway, like, does anyone know how do you have to pay the piper? Like, do you have to pay for LinkedIn Premium to be able to do it, or is it just like you have to be at some level of like thought leader to do it?
No, you just add it yourself. Like the person has to add it, right? Like I'll mute and bring mine up, but I'm like. I have a handful of endorsements for like sarcasm.
But like I tried like adding an endorsement, and it doesn't seem to like allow me to add a new thing that doesn't exist already.
I've been trying to figure out how to just remove things. Like I have for some reason LinkedIn wants to still display all the college courses I took, which isn't really relevant anymore. So I figured out how to move that box around, but not how to completely remove it. Another topic I wanted to talk about is, I noticed Craig just joined. You might be interested in talking about, we hear a lot now about platform as a service, especially with the release of Cloud Foundry and more recently Lattice. Going to ask if anyone's had any time to play with those. I'd like an excuse to kind of bring up something like that within our org, but when I think about that, I think of almost like open source Heroku. So your application almost has to be designed in such a way to even benefit from that, almost like a microservice type of way.
That is basically how I translated that myself.
So we are building something like that right now at Netflix. I've been working on this for the last 1 year. So when you say platform as a service, like it means a lot to a lot of different people. Writing a platform as a service which offers compute resources as a service, where you can say that I want this many resources to run an application, and I want you to manage the cluster across 4 different geographies around the world. Like that is probably like little simpler than say running Cassandra as a service or give a platform as a service where people can run databases. So the level of complexity like varies. Like even if you think like how Heroku started, like Heroku allowed people to run stateless applications, like Ruby on Rails applications and stuff like that. So it's a much simpler problem than say writing a platform where you can have persistence, where when your application is moving from machines, from one machine to another, you are moving all the data around for people. So that's like vastly complex. So I don't know like how much Cloud Foundry does, but this whole area of distributed scheduling and sort of providing compute resources as a service is sort of kind of like it depends on like what you want out of such a system. So I mean, what we are doing is pretty much like what Heroku and Google App Engine does. I think like Heroku does databases as a service today, but what we have built and what we have in production today cannot run databases. There are some companies I think which are trying to solve this problem. Like Cluster HQ I think is trying to do use ZFS and basically like use its cloning and snapshotting features to help users run applications with the state alongside with it, and when the application moves, they're moving state along with it. But we haven't reached that far yet. So it's a pretty complicated and hard nut to crack, especially across like multiple data centers and at scale.
That makes complete sense, and it probably depends on your org. Like when I was at UC Riverside, man, I would have killed to have something like a pass, just because you've got a ton of people doing development, and you want to abstract out that operational layer for the vast majority of the applications.
Yep.
So, like if you've got a whole bunch of developers, a pass becomes like CF whatever becomes a huge win, because now you're able to just, oh, well, let's go play with this in dev, and the dev environment's this pass environment. Let's deploy it to prod, and using the same technology. And the nice thing is that we as operators, we're less concerned about how the application state itself works, and more concerned about the using the Docker analogy, we're less concerned about the container in which the application is running inside of. We're handing them a standard box of tin, but we as operations professionals at a baseline are just responsible for the shipping, the container ship that moves those containers around, and the infrastructure that it takes to get the cranes and the whatnot that get the containers on the ship. What becomes really interesting with things like Cloud Foundry is you're now, so like Docker, you're just getting the tin. You're just getting like these really basic containers. With Cloud Foundry, it's more like, oh, you want to ship. I'm trying to think of ship something that needs shelving to be useful. Well, go use this container thing over here, and it has all the shelves and all the things in it. It's still using the basic container, but inside we've given you some additional things. Or like if you think in terms of how many people have seen like the data center in a container, like an actual data center in a container? They're so cool. Well, I forget what Sun called them, but anyway.
Shipping container.
Say again?
Shipping container. Yeah. Like physical shipping container, not like Docker.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about I was walking down one of the roads at UCSD, and there was a shipping container with the Sun Microsystems logo on it. I think it was like Project Black Box, I think is what it was called, and it was like a half-length shipping container, and basically it had ports, and it had ports on the side for electricity and water.
Actually, I think that's how Bing works. I think Bing is all in shipping containers in the Chicago area somewhere, I think.
That's way cool. Oh, did someone find? Yes. One second. I can make that appear on everybody's screen. Yes, those things were so cool.
I was at a storage company. We thought about deploying those, but it just didn't pan out.
Yeah, the idea, but like it gets back to that idea, right? Like, if that's the data center container that you're deploying your stuff into, you as the operations engineer care about the systems that go in that container, but the people that are managing facilities operations figure out how that container gets to where it goes, and like hooking up power and water to it.
I
Also,
think. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say I don't reverse the feeds because that's bad.
I was saying that like I think I'm seeing like two trends in this new age paths that people are doing. One is like for example like Kubernetes. I don't really know like what Cloud Foundry is doing these days, but at least like what I'm seeing with Kubernetes and Days and other stuff which is coming out now, people are trying to do PaaS and also do things like service discovery, for example, load balancing, for example. I think I think like there are two aspects to it, right? Like one, the way what you just said, Chris, is managing the infrastructure, like allowing people, giving people a platform where they can basically say that I want to run this application and a cluster of this application in
Mhm.
these data centers, in one or two data centers. And then there is this another level of abstraction where people are building service discovery on doing services and load balancing on top of schedulers and cluster management services, right? So what we saw is when I started this project last year, we already had a service discovery mechanism in Netflix, like it's called Eureka. Right? We already have our own IPC mechanisms and things like that. So to bring in a system which also offers like service discovery and stuff like that, where everything is like very highly coupled, like takes a lot of tax in terms of how long it takes to adopt such a system. So what we did is we said that we are going to play well with the existing ecosystem and let us not reinvent the wheel of service discovery, for example. Let us not reinvent like how we do client-side load balancing. Let's just solve the cluster management problem. Let's just solve the problem of like saying that users, you don't need to worry about infrastructure as a service anymore. You don't need to worry about all the other things that you worry about when you're running on Amazon. Like no need of thinking about how you do process supervision anymore. Like we'll do process supervision. But once you have your process running, like how you do service discovery, how you do load balancing, like it's still left up to you, right? So you can decide like what is the best way your application is going to run in your data centers. So I mean, I felt like that helped us to move things faster.
Well, and I think that that's a frustration for me right now is that we don't talk about that aspect very often. Like, so Docker is amazing. Like, I love what's happening with Docker. What scares me with Docker is that no one's talking about all of the complexity that comes with running things in Docker and running it at scale and maybe not and like when I say scale, I mean like more than 3 Docker containers.
Right.
And I think that for me, the frustrating part is that there's a lot of things that, in order to be good at Docker, you have to be fairly mature in the way that you think about your services and the way that you deploy things. And for many of us in this space, we are that mature. And for a lot of other folks, they're like, the Dockers, it's so fast. And then they're going to get a couple of containers deployed and go, oh crap, how do I actually get these things to talk to each other? And they're doing a bunch of manually wiring up of things. And while that lasts for a little while, like you're not in any better place than you were a week ago. You're not in any better place than you were just deploying Amazon instances instead of Docker containers inside of Amazon instances. You're actually much worse.
But it's fast.
I will agree with that.
So we had this problem like when we were starting off, like our platform as a service like Titan like uses Docker as the runtime, and we had to solve like a bunch of these problems like when we were starting out. The benefit of using Docker was that there were so many tutorials and like helps that people could use to like bake containers and package things in a container. The adoption was easier, but that was like the principal benefit of using Docker. Like it's such well known. But the moment we started running, so today we run like thousands of containers in every AWS region that we operate, and that's just like 1 or 2% of our workload. So we are still like early in the adoption. Like this is like a young project, and we are still like starting off, but we had to solve like a bunch of different problems. Like how do we solve monitoring, right? How do we solve logging? Like how do we do ephemeral volume management? Like for example, like we saw that when we were like natting host ports to container ports, like we were not able to run applications which were doing a lot of I/O because there is a hash table that the kernel maintains. Like when you are doing port forwarding, So after the hash table gets filled up, like you can't do more port forwarding, right? So what we did is like we have like two solutions for that. Like in EC2 Classic, where there is only one network interface, we basically attach the container to the host's network global network namespace. So then like we don't need to do port forwarding. Whereas in VPC, what we do is we can attach an ENI, and we attach every ENI to a new network namespace which resides in the container. So that way, like we don't need to do like port forwarding at all in VPC. And even the same stuff, we did it with like volumes as well. Like we use ZFS under the hood and mount ZFS volumes because copy on write file systems are not great for writing, right? So people, when they were writing into like copy on write file system, they saw like very bad performance with I/O. So we had to do like a bunch of those things to make like Docker work really well in production. And I mean, like you said, I think there has to be a lot of work that goes in to run this stuff well in production.
And like even then, I will admit, like I followed about half of that. Like I think I got lost at the the network interface part. Yeah, my head hurts now.
That was always the hardest.
But it's so true though. Like it, and what I think is exciting for me is that to be able to hear people, like the way you explain that, you actually explained it very concisely, but there's so much like interesting complexity there, and the amount that we see that in any of our own environments, it's exciting to see where we're going, and at the same time, it's way scary when we pretend like that complexity doesn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, things are getting better though. You know, like things are getting better. Like, I mean, things are much better now. When we started the project like 8-9 months back, like when we started the project, like we had this problem that we couldn't scale up a cluster from say like we wanted to scale up clusters from 100 to 600 containers like in less than like 2 minutes or something. And our main problem was that containers were backed in S3. And when you are downloading containers from 600 machine in a cluster, you are going to be hitting the same spindle in S3. Because S3, like, you are going to be hitting the same spindle, and amount of I/O that you are going to get out of S3 is going to be limited. And now, like, Amazon has EFS, Elastic File Storage. What it means is that I can mount the same EFS on every node. And once a container is downloaded on one machine, like the I/O from then onwards from that container to reach from one machine to other machines in the cluster is significantly lesser than what it would be like if I was downloading all the containers from S3. So I know people use BitTorrents and stuff, but there are some issues with like using BitTorrent with Docker the way Docker is today. But things are getting better, like getting better and better every month, I would say.
So you hit on something interesting. So like when I saw the EFS announcement, that's basically just like NFS v4 in the cloud, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it opens like some very interesting possibilities. Like there have been some discussions. Oh, like now we can have. So I mean, I have always been pushing hard about solving persistence problems is like harder than solving problems of running stateless systems on a cluster management service. And now with EFS around, like people have this mindset that also now we have EFS, so you actually move the databases around, but the data is already shared across everything. But when you write a platform, like you have to understand that what happens like when that volume is like full, like right, there is going to be that situation, the volume is going to be full. Like what are we going to do with the data and stuff like that? I mean, even though EFS is there, like it opens some very interesting possibilities, but I think like we are going to see some very interesting use cases of EFS until like finally people figure out like how to use it effectively.
Well, and see what I see the opposite. What I see is a combination of us repeating the same mistakes of our forefathers. Because like they're, in fact, Brian, you've been around long enough. Craig, I think just by the nods, you've probably been around long enough to how do we abuse the NetApp? Like, oh, you mean we're just going to run the Oracle database right off the NetApp? Rock on, we'll do that. And I think we're going to see.
Have you seen people do it? Have you seen people doing databases run on network storage drivers?
Oh yeah, I used
Absolutely.
to.
I dealt with one this morning.
Okay.
I can get in the car and drive to a place right now that has they're the database that supports the vast majority of that organization. The database itself is sitting on a NetApp. Like, and so there's that part of it, right? There's like the we're just going to what I worry about is we're going to repeat the mistakes of those that have come before us, because like at the end of the day it's just NFS.
Yeah.
And then I have the worry of like what it is exciting to see is we get more capabilities, right? We get the ability to start playing and taking advantage of those crazy things we learned how to do, like the number of times where, so this is horrible that I'm even admitting to this, but like, using the NFS mount as a queue, so you would drop files into one place on the NetApp, and you would have other boxes that ran a cron job that would pick boxes up off the queue, because you didn't have to like learn how to use a queuing system or stand up a system to do it. You just had files, and files are awesome.
I tend to agree with that.
Say it again, Brian.
NFS locking.
The days. Yeah, it's an interesting problem set. Although I will say the one thing I am excited about, just getting back to that, is there were a lot of things in HPC that you needed something like NetApp, you needed something like NFS, you needed some sort of shared storage, because you didn't there was no other way to do it. You had to have shared storage in order for it to work. And I think that this does open up those possibilities again.
It does, but I think this is something that bothers me a lot. And what you see is these legacy organizations that just do these lift and shift. Like, okay, I had it on physical gear, and now we're going to the cloud because some mandate said that we have to go to the cloud. But there's no consideration for the changes that have to happen to your legacy application or whatever it is to make it cloud ready. So I see this stuff all the time, and I think there will be a lot of really cool use cases for EFS, and I think like people like Netflix and others that are more progressive will make good use of it. But I think it also opens the possibility to a lot of organizations to do things the same old way that they've done it forever, and then wonder why they don't succeed in the cloud.
Well, and that's one of the benefits, going back to the starting point of this conversation around Cloud Foundry. Like, if you listen to Software Defined Talk and listen to Kote talk about how he presents discussions around things like Cloud Foundry, you absolutely have to rewrite your applications. You can't, in 99% of the cases, you can't just go be like, hey, we got this Java app, so we're gonna go upgrade it to Cloud Foundry. Like, you actually have to stop and think about how that application is built. But what scares me is that I feel like we're making all sorts of progress in the application space. Like, we figured it out. Like, stateless apps, rock on. But no one's talking about storage. No one's talking about network. And no one's talking about persistent databases. Because persistent databases, that's what scares me. Is
Exactly.
Well, you can do that stuff with Cloud Foundry, not the newer stuff, not Lattice or Diego, as far as I know. But Cloud Foundry does abstract away storage and networking. I think networking too, from the underlying infrastructure. And the beauty of something like Cloud Foundry is you can port your I haven't done this, so I shouldn't say you can, but I'm pretty sure that the biggest promise of Cloud Foundry is that you don't have vendor lock-in from the cloud provider. As long as your cloud provider has a CPI, I think it's the cloud provider interface for Cloud Foundry, you should be pretty much good to go. But if you haven't played with the Lattice stuff, I would recommend it. It literally took me, I think, less than 10 minutes to get going, and in that process, you don't need to do this, but I was curious, and a part of those 10 minutes was installing a Golang 1.4. So it was literally no time to get it stood up and test the apps. It was pretty cool.
What exactly did you do? How did you test it? Because from what I understand about Lattice, what I'm excited about is the Docker containers by themselves aren't very useful in a sense of, okay, if a container dies, oh crap, now what do I do? But with Lattice, if I hand off the container to Lattice, it'll probably load balance. If the container dies, it'll know, oh, this needs to start up again. I don't have to do any custom upstart scripts to say, if this thing dies, bring up another one, and it can load. So, like, what kind of, did you have like a sample app that you tried this on?
Oh, they have sample apps that you can run, and I think
they do.
There's one sample app there that's just like, I forget, it's like some stupid web app that just responds and gives some kind of like update as to which instance you hit or something like that. But you could use any kind of Docker container that has like a WordPress container or whatever. In fact, I think that's the one that Mark Imbriaco used what did he say? He said it took something like twice as long to get the RDS instance than it did to stand up Lattice itself. So I don't know. I didn't do a ton of testing with it, but it was cool to like take an app, within 10 minutes and scale it up, scale it down. And I started digging around inside it, but have since been sidetracked with other stuff that I'm responsible for. So I do want to get back to it though shortly.
On that note, can you post a link to that in the HangOps Slack room? Because I know that there are a few of us that would love to go,
So I'll give it to you because I signed up for the HangOps Slack room, but I didn't get an invite. But it is lattice.cf.
Lattice.cf, awesome. And then ping me on IRC, and I will make sure that you get a invite to the Slack room.
Yeah, we'll do. I think I may have done it from my phone or something. Maybe that's why it kind of worked. But
for those that don't know, because I just brought it up, assuming everybody knows about it. So Brandon set up a Slack room because IRC is awesome, but there's some really niceties to using Slack for scroll back and all that good stuff. So we now have a Slack room, and I think, let me go see if I can find it real fast. There's a site that you can go to, and I think it's just slack.hangops.com. Let me look. No, that doesn't work. Okay, so I don't remember what it is. I'll have to go find it.
Signup.hangops.com, I believe.
Okay.
If you're already in the HangOps IRC channel, it's at the top there. Signup.hangops.com. Then you can go to hangops.slack.com, and that's the actual Slack channel thingy. I could just click on it real quick to confirm this. Yeah. So then you enter your email in there, and then.
Yeah, I did it this time, and it seems like it actually worked this time.
Yeah. So that's yeah. So basically, because what has to happen there is you have to automate the process, because the way Slack normally works is it's based on your domain name. The problem is that you can't associate all of Gmail with Slack, or with a particular Slack channel thing. No, it's not channel. Organization, I guess, is what they're called. But yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling. You guys get the idea. All right, we got 15 minutes. Anyone got anything else crazy to talk about?
A lot of DevOps days coming up here soon.
I should be better about going to those things. I just yeah. Let's see if we.
You just got out?
Yeah, cut out for me.
So apparently I hit Command R instead of Command T. That didn't work very well. Okay. I think.
So I just have one last question. So is anybody running one of these services like Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes or Lattice in production anywhere? I would like to exchange some notes if anyone is running stuff in production, like how things are breaking, how things are failing, how it is scaling and scaling down, like those kind of stuff.
I think a lot of people haven't had it in production long enough to make those types of judgments.
Okay. Okay.
I know. I think Lucis did a blog. He had a blog post a while ago where he compared different passes, and he was disgruntled about the lack of operational, like the operational side of it. Like there was a lot of thought put into actually getting it up and running, but as we all know, an application spends most of its life sitting there, and then it falls to operating it. And the problems that he was looking at were logging wasn't very sane, I guess. Couple of that.
Right.
I
I mean, I don't even see things like, like, so we observe that disks fail all the time, like familiar disks fail all the time. And then what happens is in an ASG, like in an auto-scaling group, like a machine, one machine will become bad. And if we put more tasks in it, like more processes in it, all the processes will crash, right? So what we had to do is every 5 minutes, like we sample like how many crashes we are getting on a machine. And if that crashes on a machine is going beyond like a certain limit, like we basically terminate that machine or replace that machine with something else. And those are kind of like the stuff that you sort of realize when you're running things in production and you are not able to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
And those are things that you do, like like when those things happen. So that's why I wanted to like I'm curious to like hear like how other people are doing these things. And because for us, like the first 3-4 months was like crazy when we started this project. Like things would be fine and running and everything, and all of a sudden something would crash, and we had to basically go towards writing the system in such a way that it self-heals itself. And at least like the basic stuff, it heals on its own, remove machines, restart stuff on nicer machines, right? Like even bin packing algorithms, right? Like often sometimes like some two apps like which are more CPU intensive, like they may land on the same machine, and then the kernel's scheduler, which basically like is swapping containers around, like when they are not doing work, like doesn't do well. So we had to even like figure out like how we do bin packing, so that like apps don't stop running like after they have been running for like say 48-50 hours on a machine, right? So I'm very curious to see like how others are solving those problems.
That makes sense, and yeah, it's, I don't know, a lot to think about there.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I think just really fast going back to the DevOps Days discussion, because I lost my cursor. Okay, there it is. Because it's cool to support our folks. Lots of members of the HangOps community are also members of the DevOps Day community, and they're working real hard to make things go. So in April, we've got Paris, Denver, and New York. In May, Austin and Toronto. In June, it looks like we've got DC, Amsterdam, and I'm guessing Singapore's either June or July. And then there's stuff scheduled out even further.
Yeah, shameless self-promotion. I'm one of the organizers at DevOps Days Pittsburgh, and ours is in August 13th and 14th. I haven't really started collecting CFPs or anything yet, but last year was the first year. It was pretty big. We're expecting it to double.
Congrats to you guys. There's been lots of talk on the Twitters about how awesome DevOps Days Pittsburgh was last year.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we'll go ahead and call it for the day, because I'm sure we've all got tons and tons to do. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll be back here at 11 a.m. PDT next week to talk about whatever it is we talk about. See you all later.
Bye.